My story begins in the year 1896, on July 19th, when my father, Robert Henry Carr, was born in Oxford, Pennsylvania, the first of 9 children. His parents were caretakers at Camp Saginaw, which still exists, by the way. It was a Jewish camp. When he was 10 years old, he was sent away from home and became what was called in those days a bound boy. His parents were poor and they couldn't feed him. So, being the oldest son, they shipped him out to a farm where he received room and board for work he performed. He worked for a fellow named George Dooling, who had a sister, Edith. Her full name was Edith May Dooling, and she taught at a little school. They met, fell in love, and ultimately married. My dad would raise products, milk, or whatever it happened to be. They'd sell those products, and he would share in the profit. They lived around Kimblesville in West Grove, and it was here that my oldest brother, Robert, was born. His name is George Robert Carr, but he goes by the name of G. Robert Carr. He was named for my Uncle George and my father. Robert is very soft-spoken, very much a gentleman. I would say he's extremely bright.
Well, I've always loved my brother, even though we've had our differences. But I think we've always been willing to help each other in any kind of a crisis situation.
My sister Dorothy was the next child, and she too was born in West Grove, and it was my understanding that my mother was taken to that hospital in horse and buggy for my sister's delivery. She was the only girl in the family of 6, 5 boys and 1 girl. And Dorothy and I were very, very close. She was an absolute beautiful lady and a pretty, pretty girl growing up. And we had lots of fun together. We formed a close bond as we grew up. And as a matter of fact, Dorothy taught me how to drive. Brother Norris was the sort of comedian of the family, and Norris, you might say, was the maverick of the boys. He was big, tall, strong, exceptionally strong, and very, very comical and well-mannered. And then Raymond, which is me, of course, was born November 30th, 1924. They named me Raymond because it was my mother's brother, George, married a lady named Lola, and she had a brother named Raymond. That's it, and Henry was for my father. Charles is and always has been the studious one of the family. Charlie went on to study at the University of Delaware, and he became a doctor, and after becoming a doctor, he became a surgeon.
Raymond was willing to take the chances, and it paid off for him. Someone who has the ability like that, they say, can almost see into the future, so they can plan things better than the average person.
I remember when my brother Norman was born, and we were all sort of gathered under this tree at the farm, and the doctor came and took his bag and went into the house. Shortly after that, we heard this baby crying. We thought, sure, the baby was in this black bag. that he carried into the house. Well, it's rational, you know. So anyhow, that's a good memory.
There's something that is so special about Raymond when it comes to all of the families, and especially that I know, the brothers, when it comes to our birthdays. Raymond never forgets a birthday. Never.
My mother and father lived at 9th and Curlin in Chester. And there were more rooms than they needed, so my mother took in roomers. Not room and board, but just roomers.
My mother was a very patient person. She was active in the church, in the Ladies' Aid Society, and she always made sure that we went to Sunday school.
She did everything in the house, cooked all the meals, and put up a lot of vegetables and whatever. And did a lot of sewing, made clothes for us. And so it was, you know, that's what they did in those days.
My dad had to go out to work when he was about 12 years old. He worked on the farm, and then he worked in the steel mill.
They reached a point where the person he was working for could no longer pay him. And at that point, he had wife and 5 children.
And he, in 1932, believe it or not, he started a trucking business.
Here's a gentleman with 4th grade education. And he's smart enough to know what the free enterprise system is all about.
I remember one time my dad was going to take me with him on the truck. This was before he had his own truck. And it was cold, and I was really cold. So there was a newspaper laying on the sidewalk, and he picked it up and wrapped it under my coat around my waist to help keep me warm. Back in the, I guess in the early 30s, maybe 30, 31, in Clayton Exner and my dad worked for an outfit called Smitham's Trucking. And they hauled milk from farms out near Cochranville, Oxford, that general area, into Philadelphia, to Victor Dairies in Philadelphia. And the owners of Victor Dairies convinced my dad and Clayton Exner to get together some money if they could, each buy a truck and haul their milk for them. Anyway, my dad didn't have any money. He was raising, you know, all us kids. So he was able to borrow money from one of the farmers that he hauled milk for. He borrowed $1,000, and he and Clayton Exner each bought a truck, and that's how they started the milk hauling business. It was called Exner and Carr. And from that, they then branched out into a 3rd truck and a 4th.
My mother did the bookkeeping for the company, and she paid the drivers. I can remember my father practicing signing his name over and over and over again because he wanted his name to be flamboyant. And he didn't want anybody to think that he was not fully educated. I went with my father and some of the other drivers and Dutch many, many times. And it was great fun for a young boy to travel, ride the trucks and go in and watch them dump the milk. It was great. It was a real operation in today's world. Not many people would understand it. He started this trucking business in the dead of the Depression. Who the heck would have ever thought to do that? But he did, and then he carried it on, and he moved from cans to tankers. And that was a major step to do something like that. That took skill and the mind of an entrepreneur. Someone who sees each day as its own opportunity, and you should take each day on its own. Take the risk that goes with living.
The largest airship in the world erupted in an explosive fireball.
One of
Passengers
the
jumped from the gondola as the
major
burning airship plummeted into the
occurrences in my younger life was at Lakehurst when the Hindenburg caught fire. We were listening to it, and when you hear that announcer crying and carrying on, I personally heard that as it came across the radio.
The things were different in those days. For example, the milkman came in a horse and wagon, and there were not refrigerators, there were ice boxes. And the iceman came with a horse and wagon. And in the summertime, usually there was a guy that came around again in a horse and wagon selling ice cones, you know, what they called sweet ice, colored ice, for a penny.
And for our chewing gum, we had a cement road in front of our house, and they had the pitch tar between the cracks in the cement, and we would go out there and use that as our chewing gum instead of buying it.
As a young child, I can remember as soon as school was out, we discarded our shoes and went barefoot all summer long. All of us, at least the boys. And also tweaks a memory of what we had to do before we could enter the house. We had a back porch, and my mother would have a bucket of soapy water on the porch, and before we could go into the house, we had to wash our dirty feet. The clothes that I wore were knickers, and they were handed down from my oldest brother, Robert, would get them new, and then my brother, Norris, would get them, and then they came to me, and they were basically black corduroy knickers that squeaked when you walked. I remember the pants and the stockings, and we held the stockings up with jar rubbers because Mom did a lot of canning, and so we had these red jar rubbers that we pull up and hold the stockings up. The first job, if you will, that I had was pulling weeds, 10 cents an hour, and mowing grass. Of course, they didn't have power mowers, that was all push mower. And working on the various farms, picking beans, picking tomatoes, picking corn, and you got paid by the bushels, by the baskets, a nickel a basket. In the spring of the year, we had to go berry picking. They were part of our food chain growing up, and we didn't realize it. You know, we just went and picked berries. And then we had cherry trees and pear trees and apples and grapes, and Mom would can all of that. And on Sunday, we'd usually have chicken. And one of us would go out and catch the chicken, kill it, pick it, you know, take the feathers and the pin feathers, and Mom would clean it, and we'd have roast chicken.
At Christmas time, we usually just got one present and a stocking with some hard candy and things like that in it. And one time when we were little, Raymond and I got up and went down at Christmas time, and we just had the one car. We sat there and played with the car for about an hour and then went back up and went to bed, and nobody ever knew we were down there. But we had some good times.
I think that the entrepreneurial skills began when I was in grammar school. Unbeknownst to me, obviously, I didn't set out to say, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, because I don't think you can do that. I think you're born with that skill. I don't think you can learn the skill of becoming an entrepreneur. I never have thought so. I became very interested in music, and so I listened to the big bands on radio. And remember Glenn Miller came on at 7:15. I got to the point by the third year of high school, I would hooky school at least once a week and go into Philadelphia to the Earl Theater, because they had a movie and a band. And every week they changed the band. When Glenn Miller would come, I'd hook every day and go every day. So good, bad, or indifferent, that's what I did.
Well, Raymond and Frankie played hooky from school this one day, and they were walking down. They went to Berwyn, and they were walking down Route 30. And my dad was driving down there, and he saw them, and he pulled up alongside of them, and he said something to this effect, boys, where are you going? And of course they looked at him and were very surprised, and then he said, would you get in the car with me? And they got in the car, and of course he took them back to school.
When I was, I guess, 15 or so, I had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend sort of jilted me and went with another guy, and that upset me to the point where I ran away from him. And I had forgotten to mention that, and I actually did. I left home and thumbed it on Route 30 and got pretty close to Pittsburgh, and then I got hungry and cold, and I turned around and came back. I was gone for about 3 days.
He used to like the girls a lot. And my dad would say, he'd say, my God, Edith, I think that boy wants to marry every girl he goes out with.
I'll never forget one time when, I guess I was about 12 years old, and Raymond was about 15, and he came home, talked to me. I was laying up in bed. He came in and talked to me. He called me Butch. He said, hey, Butch, did you ever see a naked woman? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, well, I have.
So that there can be no possible misunderstanding, both Germany and Japan can be certain, beyond any shadow
World
of
War
a doubt,
II was
that America will
in full bloom. The Japanese had attacked us in 1941. All of us felt that once we graduated from high school, we were scheduled to go into service, all of the males. So I left the farm one day, went into Philadelphia, and signed up as an aviation cadet in the Army Air Corps. We spent 5 days on a troop train and ended up in Miami Beach. That was a training center for aviation cadets, basic training center. As I get off of the train, I'm carrying a a case with me, and some guys came running off the street and said to me, "What do you have in that case?" I said, "Tenor sax." So they took me and they said, come with us. So at basic training, I was immediately placed in a band. We played at a place called Serviceman's Pier, and that was great fun. So it was a great experience for this kid straight from the farm. Frankly, I had never seen the ocean before I got to Miami Beach, even though we lived in Fraser, 90 miles away from the ocean. I had never seen the ocean. I had never eaten in a restaurant. After the war was over, there was an opportunity to get a 90-day furlough if you signed on for another year. So I signed up for another year. Coming back from overseas, I was on board ship, and I was called for guard duty, and so I had just completed my tour of guard duty, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. And I fell asleep, and I was dreaming, and I dreamt about this, a girl with long, dark hair, and I could see her. And usually, if I dream something, it's, by the time I wake up, it's gone. But that didn't leave me. So anyhow, I came home on 90-day furlough, and I met Lou at Stan's Little Grill in Westchester.
Lou was sitting in another booth with some other girls, and Raymond was telling me about her, and I said, "Raymond, you can't go out with her. I noticed she had a ring on. She's engaged." And but that didn't make any difference to Raymond.
I was a college student at Westchester. His brother and a group of his friends, this is Charles, were in high school at the time and used to go to Stan's Little Grill. I had fallen very much in love with him inside of a week of just talking with him, and enjoyed his presence and enjoyed his handsomeness, and we seemed to get along very well. And he kind of swept me off my feet.
When she brought Ray to our house to ask me to be in her wedding, there was great excitement because we really didn't know Ray until then. And so we moved very rapidly with our plans to get this wedding on track, and everything went off just beautifully. And I know she was in seventh heaven. Never did I see anybody more happy than Luella.
I was 19 at the time, he was 21. And we married in March, and he went back, had to report back to the service, I guess a week after we were married. We only had a week together. And it was a very great week.
When I did meet her, I knew that Lou was that person in the dream that I had on board ship coming back from the South Pacific. And ultimately, she and I got married. And we stayed married for 32 years. I had an opportunity to stay in the service and stay in the band, remain in the band, take over the position as first sergeant. And Lou and I talked about it. And I had one child. We had Pam. And my father wanted me to work in the trucking company. And I guess I was a little bit tired of the service by then. So I decided that I would not stay in the service. And of course, in retrospect, I think it was a very good decision.
After he got out of the service, then he went to work for his dad and brothers in the milk hauling business. And that was a little easier. It still was not a lot of money, but we got along all right.
Norris and Robert and myself, together with our father, were able to build the business. I think my dad had 12 trucks when we got out of the service. And by the time I left the trucking company, well, I think we had something in the neighborhood of 110. So we were able to build it, but I didn't leave the service and say, okay, world, here I am, I'm going to go for it. That didn't occur.
And my dad really kept the business for us. He had the opportunity to sell it, I'm sure, several times, but he kept it for us when we all came home from the service. And I went to work for him right away. Raymond was always very bright. He had I don't know what it was, but he had a very high IQ. And he was just able to handle things in a unique way.
Ray always had a lot of ideas of how things could be bettered, and I know he had a very difficult time sometimes getting things across to his father and his brothers in the business, but he always had that entrepreneurial bent that he knew, he could make things better.
It's a tough business when you have the trucks on the road with accidents, and you have the union that you have to become involved with. And it just wasn't for Raymond. He was more an individual, and he wanted to get out on his own and do his thing.
We had a lot of union problems from time to time. And that I think, it upset all of us, but I think it upset Ray maybe because he was more firsthand dealing directly with the employee.
It was constant frustration for him, so he decided he would go out on his own.
My father passed away in December 1963, and I left, I believe, in June of 1964. And it was a tremendous decision. Lou and I talked about it, and she supported me, whatever I wanted to do.
Well, I thought he was making the right decision. It's hard when you have, 3 or 4 brothers working together. They all have different ideas. And Raymond just wanted to get out on his own, and so did Norris.
It enabled me to pursue the American dream. When I left, we had 5 children, 2 cars, a large mortgage, and no money. When Pam was born, which was 1946, it was typical that a new mother would stay in the hospital 10 days. And as a matter of fact, the first 5 days, Lou wasn't permitted out of bed. And I can also remember that she wasn't permitted to wash her hair for something like 30 days. So life was different. And I went to visit Lou by driving my brother's Oldsmobile, which wouldn't start unless you parked it on a hill. And of course, it Chester County Hospital, there's a beautiful hill to roll down. So I parked the car at the top of the hill and let her roll when I was ready to leave.
Actually, my first memory is of my dad. My very first memory of life is of my dad. We lived in a house called the Cardboard Shack. That's what we all called it. It was right next door to my Auntie Mae and Uncle Bob's and right across the street from Mama and Pop-Pop's. And I remember being in bed and someone taking me out of bed in my pajamas and going to the fireworks. It must have been 4th of July, I guess. And I remember being up on my dad's shoulders in my pajamas, watching the fireworks. I was about 10 when we moved to 600 Chester Road, and it was just a big, gorgeous house, big, huge big trees that we climbed in all the time, and there was a hedge running along the porch, and we would play with my dad. We'd jump over the hedge, see who could jump the furthest. My mother didn't like that too much, but my father was always right there encouraging us, getting us into trouble. My dad would do all these bizarre, fun things, and my mom was a good sport about it, you know. He'd bring home a puppy in his coat pocket. He'd bring a horse home out of the clear blue sky. You know, we'd have a horse, and he was just like that.
Pam was a really nice child. And as I say, she still is a very classy lady. Raymond Charles, he's named Charles for my brother Charlie. And Ray was the second child born to Lou and I. Ray liked to help me with the band, and he'd go to various dance jobs and help set up.
One of my funniest memories of Dad was at the Triangle X Ranch in Wyoming when we were taking a ride through the mudflats, and Dad, being the type of person he is, decided to find his own route, took his horse into the middle of the mudflats and sunk the horse right up to the horse's head. And he was sitting on the horse waist deep in the mud and the water, and we had to come and pull him out, get the horse and him out of the mud.
I believe, for the record, it was not my horse, it was my daughter Leslie's horse that got stuck in the mud. Leslie was born in Stroudsburg. Lou and I moved up to actually Marshall's Creek, and I operated a shop up there for our trucking company.
I spent a summer in Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, and I lived in a boarding house up there, and with a lot of other girls. And I had there was a boy that I was quite interested in on the mainland in Massachusetts. He lived about an hour out of Boston in Concord, Massachusetts, on a goat farm. And I was driving, I had my own car, so I was about to leave the island to come home. Summer was ending, and my plan was to leave the island, drive to Concord, Massachusetts, pick this guy up, and then we would come back to Philadelphia. Well, my landlady told my father about my plan, because she didn't think that he would approve. And he flew to Boston, rented a car, got a map, and found this goat farm, which he had no clue where this goat farm, he only knew that it was about an hour outside of Boston near Concord, Massachusetts. And he drove around in a rented car and found my car in the driveway of this farm and came in there to take me home.
Leslie's been a maverick sort of girl growing up. She was absolutely gorgeous teenager. Diane was the fourth child. We had moved back from Marshall's Creek into the Chester County area. Bought a little house, and Lou's grandfather loaned us $2,000 so we could buy the house. And the old saying, a new house, a new baby, usually comes true.
We moved from Bradford Hills when our fourth child was a year old, Diane was a year old, into a big house on Chester Road.
One of my first memories of the house that I grew up in was the fact that we had a lot of bats in our house. They would get in between the walls and you could hear them at night fluttering and squeaking. We used to go outside in the summer at dusk and lay on the grass outside and watch them flying out of the chimney. And one thing about the pool that I remember was Dad would hold the pole to the leaf skimmer. He would hold that out in front of the diving board, and we used to take turns diving over it. And each time he would raise it up a little bit higher to see who could dive over the highest.
While Lou was in the hospital with Glenn, school started. And I really didn't know that Diane was to go to school. So Diane missed her first day of school because her dad didn't get her ready.
I don't know if my siblings forgot, but if they didn't forget, they didn't remind him.
Glenn is our youngest child. And of course, he's our youngest son. And I think Glenn got his name from the band leader, Glenn Miller, who was a favorite of mine, and Lou's. It was hard for him because his sister Pam, for example, was 12 years older than him. And the closest in age was Diane, and she's 6 years older. So I would suspect it was a little bit difficult to be the baby, and a real baby, because the other kids were off to school by then, so he didn't really have a playmate as such.
In 1968, we started going to this ranch in Wyoming called Triangle X Ranch, Triangle X2. And it's a dude ranch, and they basically take rides out twice a day. I actually ended up working on the ranch. I was the youngest wrangler they ever hired at 16. And it was because of him, you know, because we vacationed there, became to know the family that ran the ranch, the Turners. They respected him, and he respected them right back, and that was a big thing for me.
One of my strong memories is his time with the band, and he had that for many, many years. Always music around the house. My mother played the piano and sang, and my father had the band, and the band would come and practice I guess on the weekends, on Friday nights, and then they would go out and play on Saturday nights.
He played tenor sax originally, but he figured that they really needed to have a leader, and they needed someone to be the boss, because every organization needs someone to be the head of it. And he was a good head.
I remember the first time we played out in public was at the Presbyterian Church in Fraser. And then Raymond got some pretty good musicians, and we played got to the point where we played at a lot of the proms for the high schools, and dances, and some weddings, receptions, and we had a real good band. And Raymond went into service, and I took over. And being a perfectionist, I made it a much better band. Raymond won't confess to that, though.
We both love music. We both love to dance and listen to music, and that's one thing that I think drew us together in the beginning, in the very beginning.
I was old enough that my dad would play, he'd buy all these 45 records that all the teenagers were listening to, and I was in charge of writing down all the words so the band could learn all the words to the songs. And he would choose these crazy songs like Banana Boat and those kind of songs, you know. And I'd write down the words, and then the band would learn all of them, and they'd practice, and it was great. It was really fun. They'd come, I know they'd show up at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and my mother would make them scrambled eggs and bacon, and they'd all have breakfast.
We were brought up in a musical house. Mom was musical. We all took piano lessons. And I just remember liking to listen to the music. It was fun to listen to them play.
My sister Diane and I would stay up at night and listen to him rehearsing the band. We would fall asleep actually in the stairway listening to his band rehearse downstairs in what we called the big living room. I guess at some point in the 50s, my dad decided to do the whole blacklight thing. And we would help him set up. We'd go to places like the Phelps School and high schools and that kind of thing, and we'd help him set up the stands to the band and get all the blacklight stuff around. And we thought that was really great. That was fun.
He and the kids would dance in the living room, and they did so much that they wore out a couple of the rugs, and Mom had to buy new rugs for them.
I guess his last feature with the band was for our daughter's 16th birthday at the downtown Motor Inn. I believe that was his last time that he played as a complete orchestra.
I had the dance band for 23 years, and that was playing in the evenings, and sometimes you'd be out till 2 o'clock in the morning and get up at 6 o'clock and go to work. So you had to stretch the day. And I guess I've stretched the days as often and as many times as I can, so that I can get out of life whatever there is for me to get out of it. I don't know what there is, but I reach for it. We have 5 children, and we had this big house. And I do remember the payment on that. That was $96.30 a month. Anyhow, I talked to Brother Nars, and Nars said, yeah, you ought to get into real estate. And I said, I don't know a damn thing about real estate, Nars. He said, read this book. So he gave me a book. How I Turned $1,000 into $1 million in Real Estate in My Spare Time. It was written by Bill Nickerson. So I took the book home and I read it, and I decided that's what I'm going to do.
I have just closed my eyes again.
He started out doing what the book told him to do. I was very worried, but I had a lot of faith in Ray because he was an intelligent person. And I thought, he knows what he's doing. I have to, you know, keep that faith. So we did.
Well, I knew that in America you can make your dreams come true, and I just knew that if I had some sort of a start in the right direction, and I proceeded to follow that, and I could make a success of myself, no matter what Went to work for Modern Housing Company at 69th Street. I worked in the Central Building, 2 old men and me. And I went to work for them because they were selling, or they were attempting to sell what I was planning to sell and ultimately buy. They were involved in selling apartment houses and commercial type of real estate. And I studied really hard the aspect of this type of real estate. And by the time I really got working as a salesman, I could analyze an apartment complex with ease.
He's very good with numbers. It amazes me because I'm not. And one time he went to the bank with me when I bought my house. And we met with the lady about, the mortgage and interest rates, et cetera, and he was just coming up with figures, figuring things out in his head that I could have never done. I don't think I could have figured it out with a calculator.
He just was very, very smart about financing, and he was an honest person, so people were not afraid to give him the benefit of the doubt when it came to loaning him funds in order to fix these places up.
I bought a property in Westchester. I bought 502 South Darlington Street. It was a row house, and I converted it into 2 apartments. I began to follow what Nickerson said to do.
When I got involved with the Carrs, Charlie was leading the band that Ray had put together before he went into service. And he needed a sax player one night. I played clarinet for years. And he asked me to go buy a sax and play that night because he needed a tenor sax man. So I did it. I went to the store and we went played a job over at Whitford Road. I'll never forget it. I said one night at a dance job, I said, if you ever want to go together in business, let me know. I want to get out of what I'm doing. So he goes to an auction in Westchester and he bought 2 houses at auction that had no plumbing or heating or anything in it. They were in downtown Westchester and actually had a toilet out in the back. So he called me that night and said, Dave, we own a couple of houses. I said, what?
I bought properties, fixed them up myself, did the work myself, and then rented them for a short time and then sold them and made profits on the sales. And I bought 2, and then I bought 4, then I bought 8, and so forth. And I used the pyramid. But I was contracting and building myself. And those skills came to me as a result, I think, of my mechanic ability with the trucks. We sat in the basement of my friend Steve Alinsky's house with my brother Norris, Dave Knauer, Steve Alinsky, and myself. And we asked questions of each other. And we put pins in a map. A true story. We put pins in a map. And all of the pins seemed to come out to Downingtown Interchange. So I said, okay, I'll go looking. And I purchased the land that ultimately became Pickering Creek Industrial Park.
I don't know whether it was because of me or not, but he did buy the land and we were planning on putting a hospital there. But that didn't go through. So he turned it into an industrial park. He got a couple of real good clients right in the beginning, and it just took off from there. Raymond was like my dad. He was willing to take chances to be successful.
Well, I'm sure my dad had entrepreneurial skills to continue his progress in the trucking business and to stay on the modern side of it. And that probably had a lot to do with Raymond's way of thinking and getting into the entrepreneurial part of his life.
Raymond's always been very sure of himself. He's just a special individual. He's got a special talent and ability, and then he knows how to use it.
We began to develop the industrial park, and we knew that we had to have a place for people to stay, for them to dine, to have meetings and so forth and so on. And so it was important that we build the Holiday Inn. Holiday Inn had a school, and so I determined that I'd go to an innkeeper's school. And so I made a call down to Memphis and told them that I'd be coming to school there, and they said, no, you can't come in the January session. You can come in April. I sent a letter and said, I'm going to have to come down. They sent a telegram back and said, sorry, you can't do this. There just isn't any room. So I didn't take no for an answer, and I flew to Memphis. And when the day that school started, I walked in and presented myself. They were certainly shocked and surprised to see me, but you know, they found a chair for me.
You have to take chances, and Ray always had the fortitude to go ahead and do that when he thought he had a good idea.
So we did build the Holiday Inn. It was the fastest completion of a 125-room Holiday Inn in the history of the company. And to my knowledge, it still is. As somebody says, boy, you were lucky you have that land at the Downingtown Interchange. I don't think that's luck. It was sitting there for a lot of years. Nobody bought it. And we did buy it. We began to develop it. So is it luck? I don't know. I don't think so.
Ray's business philosophy is very clear, and that is look at the vision and fulfill the vision. Robert Kennedy said one time, some people see things as they are and say why. I dream things that never were and say why not. I think that's Ray's business philosophy. He looks either at a piece of ground, or he looks at a building, or he looks at an area and sees what could happen.
Well, I've told him personally, I think he's a little nuts, but that I don't know whether he'll appreciate that on camera, but I think his enthusiasm to do different things is just wonderful, and I know he's had a great time doing it, and I'm happy for him. I got the biggest kick in talking about experience. I was in Philadelphia. We were at a big settlement for something, and we had lawyers around, and the lawyers were pushing the computers, adding up figures, and Ray would, before they even could put it all down on a computer or paper, he could do it in his head.
I think it was a very good partnership for a long time. Ray just has ideas and needs help in getting these ideas taken care of. And Dave was a person that could do that.
We just began building and developing. First one building, then another, and so forth. But David and I were among them. We really were the pioneers in this area.
Well, Ray's been a long-standing client of mine now for, almost 15 years. He's a client that's been very interesting to deal with because something with Ray is never the mundane. When he does a real estate transaction, he has a lot of imagination. We always look at things in a very imaginative and perspective way as to what can be done. I mean, Ray's kind of the epitome of the real estate developer that has a vision, and then we move towards that vision.
I think my dad is very innovative. He's very creative. Even as a child, I can remember him. He had a great big huge tape recorder on the front seat of the car, and he would drive around and talk into this tape recorder, and we all thought it was hysterically funny. We didn't realize that soon everyone would be talking into their tape recorders, you know. But it was a great big thing, and he would talk into it and just talk about his ideas, or he'd see a property that he liked, that he wanted to look into, or just that kind of thing.
He was always coming up with ideas of this, that, or the other. And a lot of times people would say to him, or laugh at him maybe, you know, and tell him that that's not going to work, and that would make him want to do it all the more, I think.
Once he makes up his mind to do something, that it's going to be done. And he looks to the future, never looks back. Very positive. And I like to feel that I have a positive attitude that way too, but I'm not the businessman that my brother is.
When Holiday Inn bought Harris, they also bought the automobiles. And so they had planned for, I believe, 3 auctions. And so I decided that I would go to Reno. I bought 4 cars. It was 1986. The trip to Reno probably started me on a whole other venue of life. I enjoyed the trip with my boys. I loved the idea of getting some antique cars for me to play with or work with and so forth. And then one of the automobiles was a candidate for London to Brighton run. And I knew about that rally because I've always been interested in cars. I guess my last name has something to do with it. It's very hard. It doesn't sound like it, but it's 58 miles and you drive on the left side, and there are some major hills, and you're talking 5 horsepower. It's difficult to make it all the way. So when I came back home, got the car back home, in January of 1994, I began to plan my first cross-country trip in this tiny little car.
Mr. Carr, he started to mention to me about trip across the country by 1902 Norden. That's 1-cylinder car, stick steering. And he said, what do you think, Mike? Maybe we can take this car and drive from coast to coast. I never was thinking we're not gonna do it. I mean, I always was thinking we're gonna be very successful. I mean, successful to, you know, to do this trip, but I know lots of people was thinking differently.
He just loved it. I mean, he was going 15 miles an hour all the way across country. That's like driving in a school bus zone all the way across country. I don't know anyone else who could do that.
I knew that if I got 100 miles in a day, I was doing well. So I planned my stops all along the way. San Diego to Jekyll Island, Georgia. And that's what I did.
He just wants an adventure, and he loves it. He loves every part of it, the planning, everything about it. He has the energy and the love and the zest for life that a man half his age has.
This time I'm walking
When I finished that trip, I was being interviewed on TV by April Ennis, and she was riding with me in the Little Northern, and she said, "What's next, Ray?" I said, "What do you mean, what's next? I've just driven across America." She said, "Well, I saw a pretty little blue car in your garage." This is a true story. And she said, "Why don't you do something with that car?" I said, "I can't do anything with that car. It's an electric car. And you can only go a few miles and you have to charge it." "Oh," she said, "I'll bet you could drive that across country if you put your mind to it." And I said, "I'll bet I could." I thought instead of going the same area geographically, I would go north, and I'd try to make it a historic trip. So I chose to leave from Clapton, Fort Clapton in Oregon, which was the western terminus of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And I calculated I would go along the Columbia River and follow some of the Lewis and Clark trail, if you will, and then drop down and pick up the Oregon Trail and take that over to St. Joe, Missouri, and then cross the heartland of America and go through West Virginia and Pennsylvania and end up at Atlantic City.
Before this trip, I was a little bit more afraid how we're gonna do it, because that was electric car, so the power comes from the battery. And even today, we don't have really good power, what we can use for the cars, like battery power. So in this time was difficult to put the whole trip together.
I admire what he's accomplished lately, especially at his age. The trips that he's gone on are, you know, things that some people haven't lived through. And that's it's really quite a feat in itself at the age he's at.
And sometimes he'd be in the middle of nowhere. There would be no motel or hotel or anything.
When I approached Atlantic City, there was a police escort, motorcycle police escort, there to take me in, and they were really excited. It was a fun time for the police because, of course, they'd never seen anything like this.
But he takes a flask, a silver flask, okay, from one ocean to the other ocean. So to see him come drive on the beach with this little car and, you know, down to the ocean was extremely exciting.
He had all these photographs, and he sat with us, and he remembered every single person in the photographs. He would tell us stories about who they were and where he met them, and then he sent them all little thank you notes.
The only electric car that's ever been driven from coast to coast, still. Not only the oldest, but the only one. Guy Davis got up on the podium after several other speeches, and he had a picture with him, and he said, "Ray, you've driven gas, you've driven electric," and he turned the picture around and he said, "How about a steam car? Isn't it time that you drove a steam car from coast to coast? It's never been done."
I said, "This is gonna be long trip?" He said, "Well, not really long. How about from Anchorage, Alaska to Bar Harbor, Maine?" I said, "Well, this is probably 4,000 miles. He said, no, it's 5,300 miles.
I received telegrams and telephone calls, and letters from various people who are involved in steam cars, cautioning me and telling me point blank, don't attempt it. unless you have 2 or 3 years experience in driving a steam automobile. First day was traumatic. Fortunately, I left on the 23rd of June, which is only 2 days after summer solstice, so I had a lot of light. And we had a lot of problems on the first day, and so I drove for 18 hours.
They've always managed to go along where other cars break down. Oddly enough, race cars made every trip from beginning to end, which I thought was quite a compliment to the driver running the car and the mechanic. It was a great experience. I'd like to enjoy that myself.
46 days, 5,300 miles. When I arrived in Bar Harbor, which was a marvelous occasion, I was relieved that the trip was over because it was an extremely hard trip with that big old steamer. It's hard to steer, it's hard to drive, there's a degree of danger. And of course, at that stage of the game, I was finished with my cross-country trips, and I had never been on a rally before, and I had never even thought of going on a rally. When I got information on the rally from Peking to Paris, I thought about it for maybe a few minutes. I had never been on a rally before. The other 3 trips were all planned and executed by myself. And so I made a determination to take this 1939 Ford, and in January of '97, Joseph and Mike began pulling the car apart. 7 months from start to finish, those folks had that car ready to be shipped over to China. There are categories, vintage category, and speedsters, and that sort of thing. There were some 82 cars, I believe. So 82 came into Paris, but only 60 or 62 of the cars made it all the way.
To travel through China, Nepal, Tibet, India, Pakistan, they don't have roads over there. We was using actually dirt roads or no roads at all, passing streams and rivers and camping on 18,000 feet high. So that was challenge for him and for everyone actually.
Many of the drivers are self-made men, and often you can see why they made it. They never whinge, they never quit. In this 1939 Ford convertible, the oldest driver, at 72, is Ray Carr. He made his money in real estate, spends his time tackling long drives. Ray seems to love a challenge.
Yes. Oh, I've driven across America 3 times and set 3 world records. When this came around, I thought, when I saw the brochure, I thought, I'll give it a shot. So I did. And here I am. I'm not sure I should be.
Why do you say that?
It's been very, very difficult for me at my age, going up the heights that we've gone, and the horrendous roads. I couldn't, in my wildest imagination, believe that we would encounter the kinds of roads that we've encountered today. Today was really the pits. I must have gone almost all day without being in high gear, which is tough. Traveled up the one hill in low gear for 13 kilometers. It's a long way at 8 miles an hour. So it took me over an hour to negotiate the hill. But I'm almost to Kathmandu, and when I get past Kathmandu and one more day, then I think it'll be downhill from there. Good God, I hope so.
We arrived in this little town, and we were going through customs from China to Nepal. And I was sitting there, and this little boy got on the running board, and he put his fingers in the crack of where the window had gone down. And he just stood there. And I said to him, no, no, no. And he just looked at me, and I decided, oh, hell, I've got a pack of peanut butter crackers here, a 6-pack. I'll just give them to him. So I reached over and I got the peanut butter crackers. And I gave him the crackers, and he let go. And he looked at his crackers. And then he let go with his other hand. And he took his hand like so, and he rubbed my face like this, and then he patted me. And that is a moving story. To me it is. And there were a few tears, and there are almost some tears now.
I think he's the oldest person who does these rallies, and he fares better than a lot of the other younger people that are in them. And I'm proud of him that he's still young enough to be able to do what he does.
A lot of camaraderie. Good food. You know, it wasn't really Western, but it was really good food. And a great location, and we're happy to be here. And of course, now we're happy to be leaving.
I think it keeps him young in a way, but it's also scary to us that, you know, for him to be his age and going off to a foreign country.
I just wanted to hold together for the rest of today and tomorrow. And I think it will. I know it will. I just can't tell you the benefits of that. When I rolled into Paris from Peking, it would be impossible to describe that particular feeling at that very moment. It was very, very thrilling. Going around the world in 80 days. You don't want to try that unless you know that everything is good back home and you have your soldiers on the street, so to speak, that can keep the business going. So I've been fortunate that I have had good people back here, and I guess I would hope that I will always do that for at least the next 30 years.
Section through the desert today.
It's probably the worst stretch of road I've ever driven on. It was endless. It just kept going on and on and on. You wonder why they would not be able to have a diversion that they could straighten out. And in today's century, you would think they would know how to handle road work. But it was hot and dirty and dusty, but we made it. Here we are.
You're tired now?
What?
You're tired now?
Yes, I am tired. Yeah. Tired, hot, hungry, homesick.
But you still have fun?
Oh, I'm having a great time.
The main lessons I've learned from him is you're only as old as you feel. And just because you're 40, 50, 60 years old, it doesn't mean you have to behave like people think you should.
When we reached Peking, the cars were loaded into a Russian Antonov. And at that stage, there were 40 cars that were going to continue around the world. See them open it up and expose the automobiles. And it was a tremendous sight, tremendous thing to see. And I was saying to Philip Young, this is very much an international situation, because the first car off of the plane, designed in Italy, built in France, driven by a fellow from Switzerland with a co-driver from Iran, and landing on the soil of America, having come from China. Someone once said, if it's indescribable, don't try. And I think that's what we've just come through. It was a fantastic voyage, and we're all here, and that's the main thing.
And we're all safe and sound.
Yeah, safe and sound. The cars are good. We're okay. The African Safari Rally, a tremendous trip through a kaleidoscope of countries into an ecological paradise. It was a grueling trip. And interestingly enough, I've heard from everybody that went on the trip, and without any exceptions, they've all remarked about how long it took for them to get back into normal living, that they were extremely exhausted.
We kept getting letters in the mail of his progress and how everything was going, and this is true of everything he does. And now, of course, we're wondering where he's going to drive next. Of course, it's always in a car that's back in the 30s and 20s, and you wonder if they're going to make it.
Just, he has such a zest for life, no matter what it is, in his personal life and his business life. He brings fun and exuberance and excitement to anything he does. It doesn't matter if it's work or play. He just puts a positive spin on everything and really goes for it. He just brings fun to everything he does. I don't think my dad ever has a bad day, ever.
Yeah, I don't want to say uniquely crazy, but he's very unique, and lives his life in a way I don't know anyone else that has done things that he's done.
You know, born in another era, he would have been a pioneer. Born maybe later in life, he would have been an astronaut, a test pilot. The adventure is something that is inbred in him, and so he finds his adventure in his travels in his antique cars.
I think the adventures to Ray are a way of exploring the world and seeing things. So to me, Ray is a 79-year-old explorer in modern times.
I talked to him yesterday when we had lunch. They had a group of 25 women in the restaurant having a party, and they were all women probably his age. And I teased him and I said, Dad, there are lots of women in the other room there. They're probably your age. And he said, they all have blue hair. I don't want any blue hair.
I don't know that the future holds any different formula for success than the past. If you really want the key to success, you should read the little pamphlet called The Message to Garcia. And if you'd like to read it, I have a couple of 100 copies of it.
I know his father would be so pleased with him if he were alive today.
My father started in business at 1931, the very beginning, or the depths of the Depression, and went all the way through the Depression and then through World War II. and he still made his company successful. And when I left the trucking business and began going out for myself, I did basically the same thing as my dad did, except in a different field, that's all. And I've always hoped that my children and their children will continue to do the same thing. The opportunities are there, the same as they've been since the founding of America. I don't think that I've ever done business specifically for dollars. The goal has to be a sense of accomplishment. When you do your job, you're not doing it for money. You're doing it for a sense of accomplishment. Of course you get paid for it. That's the reward. But to me, and I've told my kids the same thing, if you start out doing something and your main goal is money, it's not going to be successful, I don't think.
He's a very astute businessman, but he can come across very hard, and really inside he's a pussycat. He just doesn't allow anyone to see that. He has a generosity that he does not show to people. He helps a lot of people, and most people don't realize what he has done.
He enjoys helping other people, and I'm sure that there are an awful lot of people that don't realize that, but I do. I know that, and he's helped people from the family to just acquaintances, and it's something that is, I feel, well, I know, that is very, very satisfying to him within. I'm proud to have him as my brother.
Not just with my parents, but the children as well, that Raymond was one of the brightest ones in the family. I guess it's proven itself since he's been so very successful.
And he really was good to our family. When he became successful, he shared it with us, which we're grateful for. And I think he got some of that from our dad. My dad would give the church oil during the war without anyone knowing it. He always supplied the fire station with gas without too many people knowing it, and he did a lot for the community. And I think Raymond has done the same thing.
His dad didn't have more than a 4th grade education and wound up with a huge trucking business and a big family to take care of. And he did very well. And I think this is one thing that has always been in Ray's mind, you know, that his dad did this and he felt that he could do whatever he set out to do.
To be with Ray and know Ray and have the joy of being in business with him so many years has been fantastic.
He worked hard, he achieved, and he's reaping the benefits now. And I think that's admirable.
Well, the American dream, yes, and it's been a wonderful thing that we've observed ourselves, and it's a very admirable course in life that Ray has gone through.
Ray has really touched me and my family. We think that Ray is one of the most important people in our lives.
Dad's business philosophy is to leave a mark. This is something that I know he wants to do, is to leave his mark on this land in some fashion. And that may not necessarily be just in business, but in family also, in life in general, to show that you have been there and you've made it better for the people coming after you.
I'm extremely proud of my father for what he's accomplished in his life.
I love him.
You know, we might be at a gas station or something stupid like that, and somebody will walk up and say, "Are you Ray Carr?" "Oh, wow, you're Ray Carr." You know, and it's like, that's Ray Carr.
I think love describes him best. Love of life, love of family, sitting me on his shoulders and showing me the world, the fireworks. He's just so full of life and full of fun, and that's what he is to me.
I believe that you have to have a positive attitude in what you do and how you live. And I don't carry negativity very well. I try to do everything that I can in a positive vein. I think that has a lot to do with being successful and being happy and being able to do the various things that each of us want to do. You have to dream your dreams and then try to make them come true. And one of the ways to do it, of course, is always know in your own mind that you can do it and nothing stops you. Overall, you can always look back and see some opportunities that you may have missed and some things that you may have done differently. But when it's all said and done, I think I've accomplished an awful lot.
It's not true that Dad rescued me in the mud on the horse. It was Dad that was up to his ears in mud. It wasn't me.
It was Dad's horse.